The Buddha and his anatta, the nature and implications of mudita. A feature of the Buddha Dhamma is cognizance of the pairs of opposites in the training to get beyond them. The Buddha's method of mental training and development was to teach by first defining unwholesome or unskillful thoughts, words and deeds or practices which characterize many of man's proclivities, and then to propound their opposites of a wholesome or skillful nature as an achievement to be sought after for the abolition of them both. Eventually, when even the good must be left behind as well as the evil, when even the raft of Dhamma is to be abandoned, after crossing the flood of samsara. The trouble with so many of the unwise is their desire to abandon the raft of Dhamma before reaching the further shore. The Buddha's method of expounding the negative and the positive, the passive and the dynamic aspects of behavior, in both abstract and concrete terms, is obviously to create awareness of what is to be sought after and nurtured. The basic ignorance featured in Buddhism is not so much a rejection of the truth as it is a failure to perceive it. It is, as it were, a blind spot in our perception, akin to the physical damage of a section of the brain or the nervous system, which results in impaired vision or locomotion. In other words, the depth of our ignorance may be measured by our lack of consciousness of it. This is why it is so necessary that we should see and recognize our failings and shortcomings if we are to eradicate them. It is also important that we should be mindful of the good that has arisen and to foster and develop it to the point of perfection. To realize our imperfections is the beginning of wisdom, the first light to shine on the darkness of our ignorance. While we are blissfully unaware of unwholesome states of mind within ourselves, such states will continue to flourish, and their roots will dig deeper into our very being. Just so, too, in our relationships with our fellow men, the unperceived evils will be repeated unconsciously and unrecognized, building up a cumulative unhappy future for us under the retributive causal law of karma. In dealing with mudita or altruistic joy, we are once more to some extent frustrated with the inadequacy of translations for Brahma Vihara or Apamanya, the former as sublime or divine abode, and the latter as boundless state. To reduce either of these terms to modern idiom is difficult. The four characteristics grouped under these terms are loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity, extended to universal application. In their perfection, they are sublime and boundless, and to be dwelt in, as one speaks of dwelling in peace. So we will leave it at that. As with all perfections, these four desirable characteristics are the antidotes to the poisons of their opposite imperfections, and here is where the recognition of their opposites is apposite. Less has been said or written of mudita than of the other three of these four characteristics, perhaps again because of its somewhat clumsy translation. While loving kindness and compassion are objective, reaching out to all sentient beings, mudita and equanimity are subjective or personal in their application. It may seem strange at first until we critically examine the source to speak of either selfish or unselfish joy. Joy is an emotional ecstasy arising from pleasure. It is something intensely personal. While we can and do share our pleasures to some extent with others, the resultant impact of them on various personalities will vary as widely as the personalities. At times, what may give rise to rapturous joy in us, when shared, may give rise to positive aversion in another. A pertinent example of this would be the reactionary effect of certain music on people of differing tastes. While it is not uncommon for some of the modern generation to literally swoon in ecstasy under the influence of the combination of discordant and dissonant notes and chords, others find them anything but entertaining or pleasurable. Here we have what might be termed selfish joy on the part of the participants, by those who have to suffer most unwilling participation. For all that, within the group enjoying it, there is a reciprocity of delight, happiness, and rapture between the entertainers and the entertained. Superficially, then, we could say it is not the phenomenon of joy itself that is either selfish or altruistic by nature, but that time, place, and circumstance must all be considered in relation one to the others. However, to bring mudita within the ambit of the Buddha Dhamma, we need to go deeper into the necessity for cultivating this perfection. What are the opposites to be eliminated by its cultivation? We never tire of asserting the interdependence of every aspect of the Buddha Dhamma, no matter which particular facet is being discussed. We have already stated that ignorance is failure of perception, and it is true that greed and hatred do arise through the non-perception of their source and subsequent results. That basically, craving born of ignorance is the culprit, and that the purpose of the Buddha Dhamma is to eliminate craving. It is craving that gives rise to jealousy, envy, covetousness, avarice, and greed in all of its manifestations. Here it is that mudita, when practiced and developed, becomes a sublime and boundless state of mind to be dwelt in as a corrective characteristic for their removal. One of the most frequently used similes by the Buddha was that of fire. At times, it was the destructive quality of fire that was likened to the destructive nature of the passions. At other times, it was the ardent nature of fire that was to be emulated in the pursuance of the path to holiness. In its uncontrolled existence, fire is a destructive danger. Under control, it is one of man's greatest boons and blessings. In either case, it was a motivating force to be reckoned with at all times, active, potent, and energetic. The three roots of evil, greed, hatred, and delusion, are also known as the three fires. On one occasion, the Buddha and his band of monks were for the time staying on Gaya Head, a mountain near the city of Gaya. From their elevated position, they watched one of the great fires that from time to time ravaged the countryside. This inspired what is known as the Fire Sermon, which is the third recorded discourse delivered by the Buddha subsequent to his enlightenment and at the beginning of his long ministry. To the Buddha, the world of samsara was like the flaming plains below. "Everything is burning," said the Buddha, "burning with the fire of passion, with the fire of hatred, with the fire of stupidity." Vin 21. It is these three fires that give rise to jealousy, envy, covetousness, avarice, and greed. The craving for possessions, the craving for sensual pleasures, the begrudged success of others, the hatred that is begotten by the gains of others, the odious comparison of greater status compared with our humble circumstances. These are the fires that burn within us to our undoing. It is now evident why mudita is such an important characteristic to be cultivated. When we can view the success of others with the same equanimity, and to the same extent as we would extend metta and karuna, loving kindness and compassion, to those who suffer grief and distress, sadness and tribulation, sorrow and mourning, then we are beginning to exercise mudita and are in the process of eradicating greed and craving. Developed still further, we can reach the stage of sharing with others their joy of possession, their financial or social successes, their elevation to positions of civic or national importance, or their receipt of titles and honorifics. In such a manner, mudita is counteractive to conceits of all kinds, and its growth and development checks craving's grip. Until we have developed this subjective characteristic within ourselves, how can we develop the objective characteristics of metta and karuna? The accumulated possessions, results of our greed, may give us the pleasure and the happiness of the miser gloating over his hoard of gold. The happiness born of shared pleasures, shared love, shared possessions, shared delights in another's success, will surpass the meager selfish happiness of the miser. Unselfish joy multiplies in ratio to the extension of its application, quite apart from its purifying effect on our own lives. In Nyanamoli's translation of Buddhaghosa's Visuddhimagga, he uses gladness for mudita, with the footnote, mudita, gladness, as one of the divine abidings is always used in the sense of gladness at others' success. Buddhaghosa illustrates this by saying, on seeing or hearing about a dear person being happy, cheerful, and glad, gladness can be aroused thus. This being is indeed glad. How good, how excellent. Just as he would be glad on seeing a dear and beloved person, so he pervades all being with gladness. In the analysis of the sixfold sense field, MN 137, the Buddha speaks of the 6 joys connected with renunciation. While such joys are subjective by nature, they are devoid of any taint of egoistic craving that could give rise to the cankers of jealousy, envy, covetousness, or greed. These joys arise on the realization of the impermanence of material shapes, sounds, smells, flavors, touches, and mental states, and the renunciation of attachment to them. The nature and implications of mudita. Altruistic joy is one of the 4 sublime states of mind: friendliness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity, which together form one related group among the various spiritual or physical exercises generally described as meditation or contemplation. These all have as their common aim the attainment of mental calm or equanimity, which is intended in turn to foster the development of liberating insight. A still mind, like still water, yields a clear reflection of what is before it. This is why this particular series ends with equanimity, but the route by which it is attained in this case is different from that traversed for the most of the other themes used as a focus for concentration. The others, such as meditation on the breath, on death, on visual objects, kasina, kasiyena, or on the Buddha, the doctrine, and the order of the enlightened one, are entirely concerned with the self-cultivation of the meditator. Most of these themes are abstract or inanimate, while the Buddha and the order, in the strict sense applicable here, have transcended any power of ours to help or hinder them. So the only person concerned or affected in these forms of training is the meditator. It was doubtless to encourage those wrestling by these means with their own inner weakness or conflicts that the following verse of the Dhammapada was uttered. Let no one neglect his own task for the sake of another's, however great. Let him, after he has discerned his own task, devote himself to his task. DHP 166. But if this were the whole story, it would be difficult for such self-cultivation to serve in turn as a basis for the freedom from bondage to the self-concept, which is the main characteristic of the development of insight. Indeed, it was the recognition of the dangers of self-preoccupation, or self-righteousness, liable to arise in these often acute struggles for self-discipline, that impelled the more extreme exponents of the Pure Land school of Buddhism to abandon self-cultivation in favor of the less exacting path of reliance on the Buddha's transforming grace. But the cultivation of the sublime states represents a less radical form of compensation, which, while compatible with other practices, can help to broaden the meditator's perspective in order to achieve a mode of equanimity which does not imply withdrawal into oneself or indifference to others. The starting point here, of course, is on the ethical plane in the practice of generosity in practical ways, dana, which, in order to become interiorized and thereby go beyond mere outward form, must be grounded in an attitude of friendliness, metta, for all beings without distinction. Since this outlook implies the recognition that all beings are subject to joys and sorrows just as we are, it finds a natural development in sympathy, that is to say, compassion, for their sorrows and joy in their blessings. The former of these seems much the easier to achieve, since it is possible to feel compassion for suffering even in the absence of any positive friendliness for the sufferer, whereas it is only possible to share genuinely in another's joy if there is some element of true affection or friendliness present. This is perhaps why, on a much lower level of sensitivity, the reporting of news seems so heavily concentrated on the side of crimes and disasters, which are perhaps felt more likely to arouse interest than happier events and deeds. If the latter arouse any interest at all, it is likely to be spiced with envy or cynicism. Not only does genuine joy in the prosperity of others require some element of affection, it requires this to be of a quite high order. A great deal of what passes for love is really aimed at mere emotional gratification on the part of the lover, for whom the beloved is little more than a prop for acting out some drama satisfying a purely subjective need, the beloved's own needs being treated less seriously. Indeed, even apart from outright commercialization, a certain habit of bargaining with affection seems remarkably widespread when one begins to take notice of it. In the light of this, the ability to feel a genuine joy in another's happiness, equal to one's satisfaction with one's own, represents a truly sublime state. So it is not surprising that in the history of Buddhism, which cultivated this attitude systematically, there arose an aspiration to share with others not only one's material resources, but the spiritual resources described as merit. This aspiration follows naturally enough from the basic theory as to what merit is. Merit is the accumulation of tendencies resulting from enlightened deeds which, according to the law of moral causation, the law of karma, conduce to the future happiness of the doer. Here he is joyful, hereafter he is joyful. In both worlds the well-doer is joyful. I have done good is the thought that make him happy. Still greater is his joy when he goes to states of bliss. If the doer is still in a state where only purely personal forms of satisfaction are possible, the fruits of merit can only take this form. But suppose he loves even one being so much that, if that being is in some state of deprivation, he can only be made happy by the improvement of that being's lot, then the merit which is due to him can only take effect by benefiting him through that other's welfare. The wider his altruism expands, so that purely personal gratifications no longer adequately satisfy him, the wider must be the range of the benefit which his own merit would need to bring to others if it is to fulfill its defined function of bringing happiness to him. At the same time, his altruistic tendencies will ensure that he will have vastly more merit due to him, so his resources will tend to become commensurate with the aspirations, for example, of Santideva, when he says, "May I be an alleviator of the sorrows of all beings and a divine medicine to those afflicted by disease. May I be the benefactor and bringer of peace to them until all their bodily ailments and mental tribulations are at the end." The principle of the sharing or transference of merit, so much stressed in Mahayana Buddhism, though not unknown in Theravadan practices, is sometimes objected to by Western Buddhists because of a superficial resemblance to the Christian doctrine of atonement, which they have rejected. But the principles entailed are not really identical, since the Christian doctrine is based on an essential distinction between the roles of the creator and the created, while the Buddhist sharing of merit arises from a combination of the definition of merit and of the nature of altruistic joy. It has a further importance too, in that it anticipates the emancipation to be derived from insight into the emptiness of the self-concept, that is to say, awakening to the emptiness of the concepts I and mine in terms of ultimate truth. On this level, the description mine as applied to merit will finally be seen to be as inapplicable as in the case of any other assumed possession. This was already explicitly set out in one of the Buddha's earliest discourses, The Marks of the Not-Self, in which he taught his first 5 disciples to contemplate each of the 5 components of personality in the terms, "This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself." The fourth of these components is the aggregate of mental tendencies or activities, which include merit and demerit. Even on a lower plane than that of perfect insight, it can be seen that our deeds are not exclusively ours, because no one acts in absolute isolation, so that every act involves some stimulus or opportunity arising from activity of others. On the other hand, a too persistent insistence on the individual nature of merit can only impede the ultimate awakening to the not-self. This has some bearing, too, on the reason why friendliness, compassion, and altruistic joy are regarded as leading to an equanimity which does not imply an indifference to the joys and sorrows of others. In the absence of such a conclusion, the alternate sharing of joys and sorrows, like these emotions arising on one's own account, would be as endless as the world cycles which it is the Buddhist aspiration to transcend. The goal of the divine states is that the aspirant who in process achieves the role of a bodhisattva in a two-way empathy with others by his perfect sharing of their joys and sorrows is in a position to radiate to them stability, which in turn will help them to be less subject to their own emotional vicissitudes. In this way, he and they are liberated together, each sustaining the other. The meditative development of unselfish joy. One who begins the development of unselfish joy should not start with dearly beloved person, a neutral person, or hostile person. For it is not the mere fact that a person is dearly beloved, which makes him an immediate cause of developing unselfish joy, and still less so neutral or hostile person. Persons of the opposite sex and those who are dead are not suitable subjects for this meditation. A very close friend, however, can be a suitable subject, one who is called in the commentaries an affectionate companion, for he is always in a joyous mood. He laughs first and speaks afterwards. He should be the first to be pervaded with unselfish joy, or on seeing or hearing about a dear person being happy, cheerful, and joyous. Unselfish joy can be aroused thus. This being verily is happy. How good, how excellent. For this is what is referred to in the Vibhanga. And how does a bhikkhu dwell pervading one direction with his heart imbued with unselfish joy? Just as he would be joyful on seeing a dear and beloved person, so he pervades all being with unselfish joy. Vibhanga 274. But if his affectionate friend or the dear person was happy in the past but is now unlucky and unfortunate, then unselfish joy can still be aroused by remembering his past happiness, or by anticipating that he will be happy and successful again in the future. Having thus aroused unselfish joy with respect to a dear person, the meditator can then direct it towards a neutral one, and after that towards a hostile one. But if resentment towards the hostile one arises in him, he should make it subside in the same way as described under the exposition of loving kindness. He should then break down the barriers by means of impartiality towards the four, that is, towards these three and himself, and by cultivating the sign or after-image obtained in concentration, developing and repeatedly practicing it, he should increase the absorption to triple or, according to the Abhidhamma division, quadruple jhana. Next, the versatility in this meditation should be understood in the same way as stated under loving kindness. It consists in a. Unspecified pervasion in these 5 ways, May all beings, all breathing things, all creatures, all persons, all those who have a personality be free from enmity, affliction, and anxiety, and live happily. B. Specified pervasion in these 7 ways. May all women, all men, all noble ones, all not noble ones, all deities, all human beings, all in states of misery in lower worlds be free from enmity, etc. C. Directional pervasion in these 10 ways. May all beings, all breathing things, etc., all women, etc., in the eastern direction, in the western direction, northern, southern direction, in the intermediate eastern, western, northern, and southern direction, in the downward direction, in the upward direction be free from enmity, etc. This versatility is successful only in one whose mind has reached absorption, jhana. When this meditator develops the mind deliverance of unselfish joy through any of these kinds of absorption, he obtains these 11 advantages. He sleeps in comfort, wakes in comfort, and dreams no evil dreams. He is dear to human beings, dear to non-human beings. Deities guard him, fire and poison and weapons do not affect him. His mind is easily concentrated. The expression of his face is serene. He dies unconfused. If he penetrates no higher, he will be reborn in the Brahma world, AV 342.